Joining me on Startup Report is Ingrid Harb, who is the founder of Women's Ambassador Forum. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So the first thing I just got to say, you have the coolest URL
Yeah.
out there. It's just for all those listening, it's womenaf.org, which I think it wasn't your intention to go there, but you got to love it.
It was definitely not funny. I would say when I started, the moment I realized my URL was a little funky was when I wrote it on the wall.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in a coffee shop in Texas, which is where I used to live before I moved to Florida. And I wrote womenaf.org and I just stared at it and I was like, oh my God, what did I do? And when I started my company, I had 3 months. I put myself a 3-month deadline to host my first global conference.
Mhm.
So in 3 months, I mean, the last thing you look at is your URL because you're really focused on your business, your brand, your coloring, your messaging. So I gave my developer the freedom to buy whatever URL he thought was appropriate. But he is a Spanish speaking, she's Spanish speaking, but now everyone wears those shirts. It's Women AF, and I'm like, cool. I guess I thought ahead of time.
This master branding, if anybody asks.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
master branding. Yeah, you will not forget my URL.
So there's a lot of cool stuff to dig into. Let's start with the fact that you are a B Corp. So talk to us about how you ended up deciding to go forward as a B Corp.
Yeah. So when I started my business, I really had this period of time where I didn't know if this should be a nonprofit or a for-profit. And I feel like my business wasn't either side. So when I came to Florida, after, really starting my movement and I would work with universities and they're a nonprofit. So then they would fundraise, I would fundraise, but they had my budget within the university budget. They would create one for me. So it was a really great way to start a company, not really touching the money, being able to experiment, to grow, to have that respect and the respect from big Fortune 500 companies that we were really respecting and being transparent about the way that we operated.
Mm-hmm.
And we operated like that while I was in college because I was still young. I'm like, I shouldn't be receiving those checks directly and you're learning. So when I graduated college and I came to Florida, 2 years later and working in full-time jobs, I came across this term B Corp and my lawyer told me about it. And what I was lucky is that it's an in-between. It's a company that is a for-profit, but it's still focused on your mission and your core, purpose. And I think that was a perfect way for me to be able to still fundraise and work with corporations that look for that 501c3, even though we don't have it. They understand that our mission is still valid, and they will still want to work with you.
And what are some of the sort of logistical differences when you have a B Corp? You have to give a certain portion of the money towards something, or how does that actually express itself?
Yeah, so you do have to be transparent. And what I do is I actually partner with nonprofits for all of my events. So I'm still giving back.
Right.
Because I think, as I organize events, yes, it's empowering. It's a platform for women to succeed, to find opportunities. But beyond that, I still want to make sure that I put back money to nonprofits that are building programs or funding people to go to college or funding people to get, any sort of opportunity. So we still partner with nonprofits because there's certain organizations that can't really give you money unless they're, foundations, et cetera. But B Corps are, the difference is that you prioritize your mission. And beyond that, when you have employees, when you have, any sort of as big as your company grows, your mission goes first. So it's the same thing. It's just you don't need a board. But you can still show companies when you do business that you care about the environment.
Got it.
And there's regulations that you have to go through. You can get B Corp certified. So it's a whole very neat community of companies.
And they're growing. I think I know that we have an organization here locally, Florida for Good or St. Pete for Good.
Yes, I've worked with them. Yeah.
So it's definitely on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
So your mission is to elevate women, and it expresses itself through the Women's Ambassador Forum
Mhm.
in a couple of different ways. So can you kind of walk through the different ways that you sort of operate?
Yes. So one is through our events. So we have different events. We have our global forum, which is the product that I started when I was 18. And our global forum recruits and opens the space for women from all over the world. These women are leaders. They are either leading movements that empower and educate thousands of women in their country. And so these leaders either are goodwill ambassadors, consulate leaders or parliament representatives. And what they do is they'll apply and they come to our conference. And we have 3 days of workshops and panels and speaking engagements. And more than anything, we create a space for them to connect and open up and kind of restore. So it is very powerful because we've gotten now almost over 95 countries that have applied to our global events. What I realized, and this they teach you when you're in college, is that you think globally, but you act locally. And I totally did not listen, and I did the opposite.
All right.
So I realized this year that I also had to create conferences and summits that were local
Hmm.
so that I could create a really strong local community that can help ultimately my global forum.
All right.
So we do that, and the local summits are for specific communities. So we're having a military conference, we're having a Latin American conference, we're having women in tech. We had an event in January about, leaning into women in tech in partnership with Synapse. So every event at the end of the day, we focus on our attendees and we focus on their needs and we speak to them. Everything's interactive, everything's fun, everything is for them to have a great day and to enjoy and to kind of navigate through the emotions that they're feeling. And another way that we've started working with companies is we also help companies level the playing field. So every company that is looking for hiring more women, we do that through our summits.
Okay.
So every summit, we have also marketplaces where companies are able to be there to pitch to our audience and really be able to have and attract the right women to their corporation because sometimes they don't know how to do it. And we want to become that pipeline for them. Another, you know, arm of our business is also we're starting a job posting website. So we're going to make sure that women, when they're looking for jobs or anything, they know that we got their back. And then another arm is our mastermind. So we're starting a mastermind that is open for anyone in every corner of the world. And we're going to have 9 speakers that are going to be online. And then it leads to a retreat. So there's going to be really something for everyone.
That's great. So if we were to break down, say there was a conference that was both men and women, and then a conference that you did that was just women.
Mhm.
How would you describe the differences between the two? Is there some content differences, or is it simply the environment, or what are the kind of key differences between the two?
Yes. There is something so magical about bringing women together. And I'm sure the audience knows that are female. They understand that. And there are also a lot of events that are, male, like a boys club, right? There's so many
Sure.
that
Yep.
they're powerful too because they're supportive, they're empowering. That's the same thing we're creating. We're creating that boys club for women. I would say at the end of the day, I think the more and more and more that I do events and we grow events and we work with men as well, right? We're not feminism means, equality,
Mhm.
but people they have their own definition about it.
Sure.
They're kind of anti-feminist, which it's really ridiculous, but we want to make sure that we're just about equality and we're about restoration and we're about restoring, really whoever needs it. And I would say the difference is that there is no difference. Like at the end of the day, it's all about creating a community of people that are willing to lift each other up. That's it.
Cool. So let's dig into the restoration a little bit. How does that manifest itself when when you come together, and what obviously just being in a group of a safe environment with friends, and being able to share freely, is that seems to be a big part of the value for the conferences.
Yeah, so many ways. I would say from our last conference in January that we did locally,
Mhm.
we had a speaker that she led our day, and she has worked with Tony Robbins. She's one of the main leaders in the Tony Robbins movement, and she helped us sort of navigate the energy and navigate the day. And we did meditative sessions, and we did fun panels, and no one expected it.
Right.
And that's the beauty of this movement, is that you don't expect it until you're there, and you realize the power of energy, and you realize the power of having the right mindset.
Right.
So we had a woman that is, she stood up, and everyone, again, courage is the same as vulnerability, like Brene Brown says. And we make sure that we're all courageous and vulnerable. And this woman, she talked about how she, has clients, and her whole life she has never received. And, she's constantly been giving and giving and giving. And everyone stood up and gave her a hug.
Mm.
And I'm talking about 200 women
Right.
giving each other a hug.
Yeah.
And these are women from all ages. I'm talking from 30 to 75 years old.
Right.
We had women from every walk of life, every culture, every ethnicity, religion, everything.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's like you're there for your own soul.
Right.
And for whatever it is that you need, if it's approval, if it's I don't know, reflection, if it's acceptance, anything that it is, you will get it.
So the events that you're putting on are not, personal growth in the like Tony Robbins sense. They're professional, and most of the speakers you have are talking about professional topics. And then that sort of thing happens, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's sort of a potential difference. So obviously, in the open to all genders conferences, if it was in that Tony Robbins space, people are hugging each other all the time, and that's normal.
Yeah.
But if you went to a normal sort of jobs conference or a career advancement conference, you might not have that sort of emotional element as much if it was open to everyone, right? So and I think, do you potentially see a path forward where those types of happenings, that those are unique and a different value add to having all the women together, but then eventually, in a perfect world, maybe some of that stuff leaks over and starts to become more normal at all conferences.
So we're in between, I would say. We're exactly in between, where it's empathetic conferences. I grew up in Mexico, and I come from a multicultural family, German, Lebanese, I mentioned it. And what I've learned is I was raised with so many, cultures and traditions. And in Mexico, when you go to a party or you go to an event or a conference, everything is very service oriented and about making you feel welcome. And I brought that from everything that I've learned growing up into what I do.
Right.
So everything on my conferences, yes, the end goal is for you to find and say yes to your calling. Yes, the end goal is for you to align yourself with what is it that you are born to do, because everything and everyone is born to do something.
Right.
And maybe they'll find it here. Maybe they'll find it, along the line. But we've had companies that have found people at our events that now work in their companies, startup owners that are looking for someone that has, so much ambition and passion, and they don't know what to do because their budgets are not big enough. So they will find people here because we attract those people. But the beauty of it is that it's okay to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't touch that. And we are so scared of emotions, and we're so scared of joy, and we're so scared of so many things that we try not to even talk about. And that's why at my conferences, we enforce women to say their truth, to be honest, to say, hey, this is how I started. This is what I didn't work. This is what I recommend you. Everything is actionable, because at the end of the day, you're going to remember, A, how people make you feel, and B, what are the tools that you learned that you can apply in your life?
And a lot of that goes to, you said confidence and vulnerability kind of go hand in hand. And so it seems like an effort to get to a place of confidence, and with that confidence, the joy of being vulnerable. And I'll mirror that back to an open conference. You may not have that, unless it was specifically a general business conference. You may not have that element as much.
Yeah.
And so would you place that more on, because of the disadvantages that women have had historically, it's put them in a position where building confidence and using each other to keep that confidence strong and growing
Mhm.
is a result of that. And then I wonder, if sort of next generation of men may come around and say we've had these advantages, but to some extent we haven't gone through that journey either, and maybe the two meet at some point. Because so how much of that do you you know, that confidence discussion, do you subscribe to being a gender thing or simply a life situation thing, a societal situation?
I think there's so many things and factors about that. What I've learned, at least from my experience, is that so many times, like, and I've seen this, like, I worked in technology, there's always more men than women. And the thing is that the glass ceiling doesn't exist. It doesn't.
Right.
It's all in our imagination. Like, we can get as far as we want. Here's the problem. Corporations are not made. Their rules, laws, regulations are made for men.
Right.
So how can you compete in a company that is not made for you? You are really, and it breaks my heart that women have to sacrifice so much more because we have kids. Like,
Hmm.
that's just the nature of things. And there's not so many flexibilities that we need.
Right.
And companies have been starting, like LinkedIn, Google, Facebook. I mean, they're starting to give, the paternal leave to the men the same days as women,
Right.
more time, pregnancy, parking lots. I mean, there's so many things that are not, and companies don't do to keep women.
Right.
And also it's in the way, companies recruit and the way there's so many things that we're unconscious of that, as females, like, let's say just in comparison to my movement, like, it's taking me longer, right? Maybe because I'm a female, God, who knows, right? But, for me, it's like I'll see someone and a male that's starting a movement too, and they'll jump and do something radical and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm ready to launch this." And I was like, "Wow." And I remember I call my friends and I'm like, "Why have I not had the guts to do that? Like, why does it take me longer to believe in myself? Like, why do I have this guilt?" And it's just the way that we've been wired.
Right.
So for us, it's important to have those conversations because we have women and we go through this at our conferences. Is how do you negotiate? I mean, if you think about it, we're very blessed in the United States. Now, look at every country around us. Look at their culture. It's extremely, extremely, extremely different.
Yes.
And, we are, again, the United States is a country of immigrants, right? So we do have a lot of cultures, but we are in a different environment and it's an environment of freedom. But when you go to another country, you have to adapt.
Right.
And that's what I had to do growing up in Mexico. I had to adapt to what the expectations are in my subconscious. So I was adapting to things I didn't know until I came here and I was like, "Whew,
Got it.
I can do whatever I want,"
And you said the word wired, though. You don't mean internally wired. You mean raised or
yes,
the environmentally
internally,
wired. Got it.
environmentally,
Yeah.
yes.
Cool. Interesting. So one of the other interesting aspects of as women have made strides and grown their presence in many different areas of our of our economy. There are certain fields that are becoming dominated by women, and a lot of times the attention goes specifically to sort of the corporation and the boardroom and C-suite and whatnot. And certainly the archetype of the C-level, which is at the end of the day a very tiny percentage of the professional, of all the professionals in the world, there's just a millionth of a percent that are actually C-levels. And you think of the stereotypical CEO is the guy who's relentless, who never sees his kids, who just goes and works 150 hours a week to get there because that's just the nature.
Mhm.
They happen to be that. Now, do you feel like uh, that women obviously when they have to stop historically have stopped to have 2 or 3 years off or a year off with children, do you think that stops what would be a natural flow to do that, or do you think that there are just inherent differences in gender that way?
There's so many answers.
Trying to ask the question just right.
And that's a wonderful question. One of I would say many of the women that I've had the pleasure working, there are so many barriers. For some is they want, they've grown up or with a very supportive mother. So, like in my case, I've grown up with a mother that was there for everything.
Mhm.
She's at my events, every single one. She's supported everything that I do. So for me, when I want to have a family, I always think of, okay, then I want to give that up because my mother was there for me.
Right.
But what we don't realize is that it's a couple and you are there as, the same as whatever figure you have is, and sharing that and being okay with allowing that other person to help you. And what I've learned is that there are so many things that stop you, and that might be your family, that might be most of it is external,
Mhm.
that sort of insecurities that you've grown up with that stop you from being or becoming who you want to be.
Right.
And since I was young, I told everyone around me and I made sure I would tell everyone. And I would tell everyone just for myself. And I was like, I am going to grow a company. I want to work forever. I want to be fulfilled.
Mhm.
And it's just insanity that we have to say that and that we can't because it seems so far away.
Right.
And I remember, since I was young, being told by people like, you shouldn't be like that. You're not going to attract men. But there's so many things, and for me, I wanted to change that direction in the way my family was wired,
Right.
and I have been able to do that, and I'm attracting what I want, but imagine all those women that don't have that support,
Right.
that even though they're more successful than their counterparts, they feel like they have to give it up, and there shouldn't be a giving it up. It should be an equal give it up, right? You give up something and I give up something, so I think as you mentioned, like the C-suite, I think there is so much emphasis and energy put into the C-suite because they make the decisions for the entire corporation.
Yep.
And because of them, there are new rules. There are so many things that really are the sort of brain of the whole organization. And if we can change those people into having more women, more people of color, then you're able to change everything around it.
Mhm.
And so that's why I think there is so much emphasis on it. But I really think there can be a change from the bottom up as well, but that will take longer.
Yeah, so a couple I've got a couple cool insights. So number 1 is that what I don't hear talked about enough is that the co-parenting really is fundamental to giving everybody the equal to opportunity to rise and be able to dedicate themselves.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, the people who are putting in the 100-hour weeks are going to be more likely to get to the top of their organization just because they're going to be more practice,
Mhm.
more connections, more time in, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so to make that option available for everyone, then that starts at home. And that I don't hear that talked about a lot. So I think that's an important point.
Mhm.
And the second thing is I've noticed how how exact I've normally I just roll, right? And I've been trying to be very exact with my questions because I really want to represent. And I realize that, I think that there's a lot of trying to walk the middle line and making sure your question doesn't trigger anybody's whatever.
Mhm.
That's exhausting, right? I'm exhausted
Yeah.
by doing it for 3 questions. So I felt that you've been very just straightforward and vulnerable and said your truth, and
Mhm.
it may not be hard line or soft line. It's just where you are.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lesson to be learned there about being open to communication and being able to just have that back and forth and know that everybody's ideally most people's intentions are to communicate and get there.
Yeah.
Um,
And I want to say this story. It's, when I was 16 and I had my first internship in a law firm, I was, faced with a situation where they told me that they weren't going to be able to pay me. And I remember calling a friend of mine and asking her, what do I do? And, I really want to make sure I can afford, obviously there's different priorities, but back then I was like, I want to buy this thing and I can't afford it and my parents won't buy it for me. And I need a job because I want to buy that thing. And I remember going back to the corporate, to the law firm and saying, hey, I was so young, right? And I was like, I am not going to work here unless you pay me. And I gave like $3 above the minimum wage because I was like, maybe I can push it a little bit. And they said yes. And ever since then, I have felt free
Mhm.
to be able to ask. And even if you're a corporation, I think there is so much fear on asking. And it's because since we're young, you're taught to be quiet or not ask too many questions or conform. And even when you look at boys and girls, the way women are raised, they're, raised to be more like, clean. And there are all these products about girls with kitchens. And those are all so many stereotypical games.
Right.
And they teach men to be fearless.
Mhm.
So when they go into the workplace, it's like they don't have a fear of asking and they don't have a fear to jumping because they're used to getting dirty,
Right.
right? On the playground. And women don't. So it's just, I became fearless when I was younger
Right.
and kind of learned to play in the dirt. So that helped me. And I think that's where it's understanding where you're at in life and being able to compare where you're at with other women to know where your limitations stand.
Well, I've enjoyed the conversation. I think we're going to have a couple of more.
Likewise.
I think this will be out just after your Women in Military conference, but I'm sure there'll be more in the area. Greatly appreciate the work that you're doing, and we'll watch and support wherever we can.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.